podcast. I am your bald host, Mookie Spitz, and the one with all the heart today is Mandi Zucker, Executive Director of End of Life Choices, New York. Welcome to the pod.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks so much, Mandi, for making time. We all have aging parents, aging relatives, and we all face one way or another end of life decisions. The American healthcare system has a traditional way of dealing with these end of life issues. And as many of us know, sometimes these situations can be very, very trying for our elderly relatives, our families, our friends, everyone we know. And your organization is advocating an alternative to the traditional approach of our healthcare system and even our broader culture in terms of how we're looking at these late life issues. Can you give
Sure.
us a little context? Tell us about you, your organization, and how what you're proposing could really offer freedom, choice, and benefit to millions of families, essentially every family in the country who inevitably has to deal with and is currently dealing with these end of life challenges.
Absolutely. I always say, there's a 100% mortality rate. No one gets out alive. So this is an issue that affects all of us. And thank you so much for giving me a platform to talk about it. So I'm the executive director of End of Life Choices New York. Our goal is really to support, advocate, and educate people about end of life. We are advocating for a bill, which I'm very happy to talk about, but we don't actually advocate for anyone to do anything that they don't want to do. We want everyone to have the options that they want. So if you want to die on a cold, hard hospital, operating table with the doctor pounding on your chest, we want that for you. We know most people don't want that. Um, but we don't have a stake in the game as far as how you decide that you want to die. We just want you to have the choices available to you so that you can die in accordance with your own values and wishes. So one of the ways that we are doing that is by trying to expand options for people at the end of their life. In New York, where we're based, that means passing medical aid in dying. It is currently legal in 10 states and the District of Columbia. I think we are about to have it also available in Delaware. We're just waiting for the governor's signature.
Can we take a couple steps back? This sounds phenomenal, but for those listeners unfamiliar with MAID, can you quickly differentiate medical assistance in dying from traditional views of euthanasia and everything associated with it? Because we know it can be problematic philosophically, from a religious, and especially a cultural point of view.
Absolutely. So the major difference between medical aid in dying and euthanasia is that it is truly an independent, autonomous act, medical aid in dying, where euthanasia is where someone else um, gives you the drugs, right? So a doctor is injecting you with a shot. The doctor doesn't do anything, and the doctor frequently isn't even there when somebody decides to die by using medical aid in dying. So the person, the patient, has to be able to self administer the drugs, meaning they have to be able to pick up the drink and drink it themselves, right? They have to be able to swallow it. Um, and really what that does is it's a safeguard for people who are concerned that there will be abuse. So the people that are dying have to be the ones that say at the very last minute, I am choosing to swallow this drug to end my suffering.
Then how is that different from suicide?
Mhm.
So it's personal volition, which I understand completely. So in a sense, the patient and their family are removing themselves from the health system in the sense of it administering the agent
Yep.
of the end of their life. What's to preclude this being abused? There are many people who might want to do this. Describe some of the guardrails that are
Mhm.
there and how that ultimately ties to your mission, which is
Sure.
changing some of the laws throughout the country.
Right. So I'm going to just start with the sort of the difference in definition between suicide and medical aid and dying. Medical aid and dying is meant and is only allowed, and there we could talk about the safeguards for people who are dying. Death is at your door. All medical aid in dying is allowing you to choose a little bit of autonomy, making sure you know your kids from California could be here if you want them to be here at the time of your death. If you want to be sitting in your rocking chair on your porch, it allows you some of those choices to end your suffering in a little bit on your own terms. The people that are using medical aid and dying, I've never heard any one of them say that they actually want to die. They don't want to die. They want to live, but they can't. Death is death is knocking and they are just taking a little bit of control over that, which is
Do you
different
need
than someone with suicide.
do you need to how do you prove this and what kind of range are we talking about in terms of
Yep.
time left?
Yep. So the criteria, the way that we have it in New York, and hopefully we can pass this bill very soon, is that you have to have a diagnosis of 6 months or less to live. Two doctors have to certify that you have less than 6 months to live. So, someone who dies from suicide, there is no doctor that is going to certify that you have 6 months or less to live, right? Because depression or anxiety or any other mental illness that may contribute to a suicide, they're treatable. Um, these are physical illnesses only. Mental illnesses are completely excluded from this criteria. So it's a physical illness that will kill you within the next 6 months, and
All
you're
right.
just taking a little control.
So let me set this up for our listeners. You have an aging parent, family member. They have a physical illness which will literally kill them within 6 months, according
Hmm.
to the diagnosis.
Yep.
You have decided as a family that you want to mitigate this family member's suffering and the suffering of the entire family. There is a legally allowed healthcare system reinforced system that exists right now in a handful of states in the United States, of which New
Mhm.
York is yet to be one, but your group is trying to enable it to happen there, where
Yes.
as a family, you can get together and decide that you want to alleviate the suffering of your family member who has only 6 months to live by self administering a drink, as you're saying, which is lethal,
Hmm.
and being able to plan this event,
Yep.
memorialize and celebrate this family member, and embrace the inevitability of their passing in a way which is compassionate, which is
Yep.
transparent. And the only goal here is to minimize suffering and empower the decision making on the part of the person suffering and their family to compassionately end their life, which is going to end anyway. And that makes medical assistance in dying different from euthanasia because the person who is dying will take their own life. And
Yep.
it's different from suicide because it's out of the context of simply an individual deciding to die, devoid of these limitations. And the limitations
Absolutely.
are 6 months to live, and it's within the legal and healthcare framework
Mhm.
established by the state.
Yes.
Is that more?
Absolutely.
Okay,
There's
great.
a
Yeah,
whole
I just wanted
other,
to be very, very clear about this because
yeah,
it's easy to misunderstand what's going on here. Very
absolutely.
important.
The other things that are required in order to qualify for medical aid in dying is that you have to be mentally competent. So you have to be, your doctor has to determine that you are able to make decisions for yourself. So if you have a mental illness, no doctor is going to say that you are competent. And if they have a concern about that, they will send you to a mental health practitioner to make sure that you are. You also have to be an adult. So you have to be 18 years or older. Um, the other thing about suicide, I just want to say, is that what ends up happening in many states where medical aid in dying is not legal is that people turn to suicide, right? Which is awful. It's often violent. It's You're often alone. I've talked to people who have said, their family members are afraid to wait, right, to die naturally, because of the pain and whatever else they're worried about. So they take matters into their own hands. I knew of a woman who took a bunch of pills. And no one knew for 3 days. And when they found her, what they said was the first thing they noticed was the smell. They walked in and it was this awful, I mean, it was an awful scene. Her mom, this woman clearly didn't die. She probably died quicker than she thought she was going to. And um, it was just an awful scene in her apartment. Um, we don't want that. I mean, it's traumatic for the families to have to do that. This woman was alone. She died alone, like just awful. And who knows what was going through her mind. And no one was there to hold her hand. No one was there to just, tell her that they love her, to make sure that she was taken care of after she died. Um, and that's what medical aid in dying avoids for so many families.
Yeah, and as a counterexample to that horrific example, one of my prior guests on the podcast was Carol Abalafia.
Hmm.
And she engaged medical aid in dying within her home state of Pennsylvania, where, unlike New York, where you're an advocate, this system is in place. And
So I'll just
exactly,
stop you for a second because it's not legal in Pennsylvania. Carol lives in Pennsylvania. Her mom lives in New Jersey. So her
oh,
mom
good, good.
did
Thank
it
you for
in New
clarifying
Jersey.
that. Thank
Yes.
you for clarifying that. Okay. So, mom
Mhm.
who lives in New Jersey
Yep.
was able to. This actually illustrates the urgency of your
Hmm.
cause.
Yeah.
So Carol actually got lucky because her
Hmm.
mom was in New Jersey, although Carol resides in Pennsylvania, and she was able to do this for her mom. So that's
Exactly.
actually a great point. And
Hmm.
and Carol actually did research. She went online
Yep.
knowing that her mother only had months to live, suffering from ALS, debilitating, rapidly, progressively worsening condition. Her mother had fallen, was just not in good state. And she found you guys in a sense through her
Yep.
own research. And she
Hmm.
became an advocate for her mom
Yep.
and went through the steps legally and through the healthcare system. And it sounds macabre, but it's actually glorious and empathetic and warm. They had a party for
Yep.
her mom's passing, and the family gathered. Carol, her daughters, the entire extended family, Barb's best friends,
Yep.
and they saw her off almost
Hmm.
to the moments of her passing. And
Yep.
it brings pretty much a tear to both of our eyes just to think about how glorious that the courage that it took her mom to do
Yep.
this, and
Hmm.
the acceptance of the inevitability of her passing, and simply the empowerment of an individual from personal freedom to make that
Absolutely.
decision for themselves, to invite their family to participate. So you're moving from this environment of shame and fear and extreme cases of having to commit suicide and to potentially find your relative in such a dire under such dire,
Absolutely.
awful conditions. And this is literally the opposite.
Opposite. I mean, what a
which is,
beautiful death. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah,
no one wanted Barbara to die, including Barbara herself, but
right,
knowing that, there is a 100% mortality rate. We are all going to die. And
right.
she was dying. Knowing all of that, she had the most beautiful death. I mean, if we could plan it, like we plan all other transitions in our lives, our
Yes,
weddings
yeah.
and graduations and divorces and new jobs and all of the things that we plan, right? We put lots of effort into all of those things. This is just one more transition that we could plan and make beautiful.
Yeah, and then Carol and Barb and the whole family found themselves on network broadcast television. We'll be
That's
sure
it.
to put the link in the description here. I'll put my conversation with Carol
Awesome.
in the description as a vivid human case
Hmm.
study or example of the compassion, transparency, empowerment, personal freedom, and courage that goes into making something like this happen. And it's such a far cry from the darkness associated with dying when you don't have this power to make
Yes,
decisions for yourself.
absolutely. There's another story. I mean, I love Carol's story because it's exactly what we want. But there's so many other stories. There was a woman recently in Florida where it is not legal, um, who had made a pact with her husband that if one of them were suffering, that they would end up, helping the person that's suffering by killing them and then killing themselves. This man was actually in a hospital in Florida in incredible pain. They were not able to manage the pain, even in a hospital setting. He begged his wife, and she ended up taking a gun and killing him. And then, before she had a chance to turn the gun on herself, people came rushing in. And I mean, the stories that I've heard about some of the people that came rushing in and saw that scene, they haven't been able to return to work. It's been an awful, traumatic experience for all of them. That woman was arrested. I think she had to go to jail. It's, she's an elderly woman who was trying to help her husband because he wasn't getting the relief that he needed. And there's no reason that we should have to resort to that. I mean, there's just no reason.
Yeah, I mean, as you could probably tell, I'm all in. From the
Mhm.
moment that Carol told me about her experience, her family's experience, the light bulbs went off in my head, and the blood rushed to my heart, which is just so human and so
Yeah.
necessary. And as a culture, we're so traditional in our view of death and even sex and all of
Hmm.
these verboten topics. And as
Yep.
we're maturing as a culture and as a country, we're coming to the realization of the power of personal freedom and transparency and honesty. And if
Yep.
we live in a culture, especially now, of don't tread on me, get the government out of our face,
Mhm.
right? Let's
Yep.
celebrate individual liberty. then
Absolutely.
then then the one area where it's most important is not only in our birth but in the circumstances of our own death, especially when it's mandated by nature herself.
Yep.
Yeah,
Absolutely. I mean,
very
it's very
very powerful.
frustrating. Yeah,
Yeah,
it really is. And it's very frustrating that, um, you know, often, and I don't want to make this about money because it's not about money, but, we spend the most amount of money on our medical care in the last 6 months of our lives, right? So if it's in the last 6 months of our lives, it means it didn't work, right? Because we die. So we're spending tons of money getting usually invasive, often painful treatments to die,
yes.
which is
Yeah,
ridiculous.
because we can't let ourselves and our relatives go because there's
Hmm.
a cultural, sometimes a religious norm that air quote suicide is bad, that it's
Yeah.
a show of weakness,
Hmm.
instead of, within the context that you're describing here, a show of courage and
Yeah.
strength. and
Absolutely.
love and
Mhm.
compassion. It's the exact opposite. Now, let me set up a steel man argument for what I have heard are arguments against MAID for the
Okay.
sake of fairness. And I think it's useful for this conversation, not so much to thwart them or to argue against them, but to further illustrate the merits of what we're talking about. One
Sure.
argument I've heard is exactly what you mentioned, but in a different way, where if you institute a policy like MAID and even make it a federal law, which would be the ultimate goal of empowering all 50 states to do it, then it's a slippery slope for a number of reasons. One, the criteria of 6 months can be iffy. There's a
Hmm.
potential for abuse, like there is with any kind of personal freedom. And here's the biggest one, which is this is, in a sense, a looking glass version of what you described about the healthcare system taking care of people. And this argument is essentially that if you enable someone to take their own life, then it will disincentivize the healthcare system to provide the necessary support and services for late in life treatment and care. But
Sure.
we set this twisted reverse precedent that, oh, why don't you just MAID yourself, and we don't have to pay for you. We don't have to care for you. And perhaps most significantly, the disadvantaged, disenfranchised segments of our population will suffer the most because they're always disadvantaged and disenfranchised, especially regarding their health care.
Yes. So I will just, I have an easy answer to that. But before I get to it, I'm just going to say um, it doesn't make sense that we would be um, disincentivizing because insurance companies, doctors, they all make money when they do the procedures, right? So they are making money if these procedures are done. Now, medical aid and dying, the drugs are not cheap and they're not covered. So there is already a reason why some families aren't even going to be able to access this because they can't afford it. It's not covered by insurance. So that's, I don't want to say it's a good thing or a bad thing. I wish that more people had access to these drugs if they need them, but it's not covered. So people aren't going to, sometimes it's cheaper to get medical care that is covered versus having to pay out of pocket for drugs. The other thing that is sort of the easier answer is that medical aid and dying has been around for 30 years. Started in Oregon 30 years ago. There has not been one case of abuse, and there has been no slippery slope. The criteria has not changed at all. It's been 6 months, it's been terminal, it's been mentally competent. The list, not that we have a specific list of diagnoses that are eligible, but all of those criteria, it means that people with cancer, people with ALS are going to be able to access this, not people with dementia. That has not changed because by the time they would be eligible, they're no longer mentally competent. So none of that has changed. We've also not seen any disincentivizing of medical treatment in those states. And people that get the drugs can still get the treatment. Only about 1/3 of the people that ask for the drugs and receive them actually take them.
Oh,
So
that's interesting
sometimes,
too. That some people are like, I'm not so sure about this.
well, either they've decided against it and they continue to get treatment. Just because you've gotten the drugs, it does not mean that you can't continue to get treatment. Sometimes, unfortunately, I think they then become unable to self ingest the drugs. So they're no longer eligible to take it, even though they have it in their possession. And sometimes people actually feel like I could try harder. I could take this one more treatment, one more chemo. even though I know it's not making me feel good, because I have an out, because I have these drugs sitting here knowing I can do it if I need to. So it gives them a little bit more push to actually get treatment, because they know that
That's
they
it.
have this option.
That's fascinating. That's an ancillary, almost a halo benefit of this.
Sure.
And it again, it has to do with personal freedom and empowerment. If
Yeah.
given choices, people feel less closed in, less forced to make a decision, less alone, less afraid. And all of a sudden they're like, well, I have the drink, or maybe I have another treatment and another hour or two with my grandkids. And then
Mm-hmm.
they can weigh their options from a point of
Yeah.
view of empowerment rather than
Absolutely.
disempowerment. That's
Yes.
very, very powerful. So
Mm-hmm.
you're selling me in. Can you tell me a little bit about what does awesome look like? How many states allow this procedure
Yep. So
right now? Where
currently, it is 10 states and the District of Columbia.
okay.
It looks like Delaware is going to be next. It's passed through their legislator, and now they're just waiting for the governor's signature. And all indications are that he is going to sign it. So Delaware will be next. Um, and I'm going to say New York's going to be right after that. I mean, we have very good indication that it's possible that the bill is going to be voted on next week, actually.
Wow, that's very exciting. So
It's very exciting. It's
yeah,
never been voted on.
we're
Um,
time
we ju-
stamping this April 25th,
yes,
2025. So
we
that's
are.
great.
We are really you know, cautiously optimistic, that we know we have the votes. We know, first of all, we know that New Yorkers want it. 72 to 78% of New Yorkers across all demographics,
Yeah.
race, age, political affiliation, religion, they all want it. And now, what we've been trying to do is convince their legislators to represent their constituents, which is harder, apparently, unfortunately. Um, but it looks like we now have the votes, at least in the assembly. So it looks like they're going to bring it to a vote in the assembly as soon as next week. And the Senate looks pretty close behind. So fingers crossed. And if anybody's listening from New York, please reach out to your legislators and let them know how important this is to you.
That's great. And as far as your organization goes, as far as touch points and
Mhm.
engagements, do you have anything imminently planned for reaching out to the public, messaging, sharing information, that kind of thing that we can let listeners know about right now?
Absolutely. So, one thing I would say is every Tuesday, Compassion and Choices actually is like the group that really leads this part of it. They show up in Albany every Tuesday. And if you are anywhere near Albany, I would encourage you to go on Tuesday. They have signs, and we, walk the halls and let people know that we're not going away until they do what they're supposed to do.
Yeah, and we'll
Um,
put a link. We'll put a link in the description so you can learn more about them and
Excellent.
this gathering. This, in a
Excellent.
sense, a lobbying effort from the public. This is
For sure.
public lobbying for a worthwhile cause that
Absolutely.
could deeply impact the happiness and security of your whole family.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
What we're doing right now is very targeted um, advertising in 5 different specific Senate districts, where we really are trying to make sure that those senators know that their constituents support this bill. So if you're getting ads that are popping up on your, when you're shopping online or you're on Facebook and an ad pops up, it's probably from us, from End of Life Choices New York. Click on it, and you can then send a postcard. We'll do the whole thing. You just put in your address, and we send the postcard to your senator, letting them know that you support this bill. They need to hear from their constituents. And they need to know that this is a really important issue for you.
and we'll put the link to your website with the call to action there as well. So your
Excellent.
website has these recommendations and these
Yes.
actions that you can take
Yep.
today after hearing about this to facilitate this law being passed in New York State.
Yep. And I
Excellent.
send out a newsletter every 2 weeks with updates about what we're doing, what we need, how people can get involved. And again, on the website, people can sign up for the newsletter. It actually goes out next Wednesday. So hopefully, next Wednesday, I'm going to have some big title. Our newsletter is called Dead Serious News, and I'm hoping that in the newsletter next week, I'm going to have some major read all about it. Some major news. So if people want to stay
Okay.
updated,
Yeah, if you want, put the link to this podcast, and they can hear
I
you
will.
pitching, hear
I
you
will.
pitching it. So this is very exciting, and it's a
Yeah,
very much a worthwhile, important cause
it is.
to
I
uh
mean,
to
most
to, to
people will
make this
tell
happen.
you, right? Like, I'm sure you've sat at dinner and you've watched a movie with someone, and then they say, "Oh, if that ever happens to me, pull the plug." Right? We
Right,
all kind of talk like that. No one wants
right.
to live in pain and in suffering just to die. That's all we're
Yeah.
doing is trying to make sure that people don't have to do that.
And most significantly, and this can't be said enough, it's not done randomly, haphazardly. There is a system in place. There's a criteria for it to
Yep.
apply to prevent potential abuse, to prevent
Yes.
potential negative impact to the health system, to protect people who might otherwise be disenfranchised or disadvantaged, and to protect your own family from it
Absolutely.
potentially being abused. So
Yep.
this is wonderful to hear. And in terms of an aspirational feeling or goal, for this to be in effect in all 50 states probably makes a lot of sense. It's
Sure.
a bigger ask for the U.S. Congress to approve something like this, and our
Yes, it is.
president to sign it. But
Mhm.
I'm assuming that would be where you're looking up to as well, to make it a federal
We're
kind
not
of.
even, honestly, like, we're not even looking at that at this point. Um,
Okay.
we really are focused on New York. Once New York passes, our work is not done. We then have to educate. I've spoken to doctors in New Jersey. The law has been, it's been legal in New Jersey for 5 years, and many doctors have never even heard of it. So
Yeah,
there's a
see that.
lot of work.
Right. I was going to ask you about
Mhm.
that because Carol, our super caregiver that we've been talking
Yeah.
about, had to do her own research. And
Yeah.
when she informed me of what was going on, I was like, I sensed something like this was happening, but I knew nothing of the specifics. So
Right.
there's in a sense a marketing and awareness building need for
Absolutely.
MAID, even excuse me, even within the states where it
Mhm.
is legal in practice. Many people
For
don't even
sure.
know that it's available to them.
Yes, absolutely. And, doctors, pharmacies, they all, you can't go to CVS and get these drugs. You have to go to a very specific compounding pharmacy, and no one has to participate, including doctors and pharmacies. So if there's 4 pharmacies in all of New York that could make the drugs, and only 1 or 2 of them choose to, we have to educate all of them about, what's involved, and helping them to get all of this kind of set up, right? And the doctors. I have lots of doctors that say, I think I would be willing to help a patient, but I don't know what's really involved. And so there's a lot of education that has to happen once this bill passes. And we want to make sure that we are there for the healthcare profession, for patients and for families, so that everybody knows what their options are, so that they can make really informed, educated decisions. So we're focused on New
Absolutely.
York.
You mentioned money earlier, and
Mhm.
money drives so much of our society, and the pharmaceutical industry in particular has been dinged for excesses and potential abuses there. But the profit motive has a positive impact in that research and development is conducted, over 90, 95, I think it's even higher, 98% of drugs in pipeline trials fail.
Hmm.
So for every successful drug, you have many, many others that fail. So it takes a huge investment on the part of these companies, huge risk.
Yeah,
And then the reward is their patent rights and exclusivity to make some money. But the end result is that the public receives what were once considered miracle cures.
absolutely.
Immunotherapy didn't fall out of the sky, and
Nope.
and many of the treatments that improve and extend life are a consequence of this melding of science, research, the universities, and the raw plutocracy of business. So it
Yeah.
all comes together. For something like MAID, there's not much money here, right? There's no new drug, there's
Hmm.
no company pushing this. So it's all about grassroots advocacy like what you're doing. And one reason I would assume that the healthcare professionals are undereducated, that the public is largely in the dark, is because money isn't a part of this. It's all a purely empathetic human desire for
Sure.
empowering families with this ability, right?
Absolutely.
That's the irony of this. This is a
Hmm.
purely humanistic
Yes,
enterprise outside the conventional market that usually drives change in this country.
absolutely. And it's interesting when people are saying like it's driven by money, like, you know, it is a really interesting idea because there's not a lot of money in this. Nobody's making a ton of money doing it, which is, I think it's a good thing because we're not pushing
Right.
for
Right. And
anybody.
and I'll maybe cross the boundary a little bit just for the sake of conversation. The provider side, companies are making hundreds of billions of dollars in that last 6 months of agony. That's a crass way of looking at it, but it's patently true.
Mhm.
The insurance companies, here again, I'm just riffing as the bald guy talking to you. The insurance companies conversely could save all those tens, hundreds of billions of dollars. So I'm just wondering why on the managed care side there wouldn't be a bigger embrace of MAID. I'm just tossing that out. That's beyond your pay grade and mine, but
Yes, it is.
it's just something to think about, that if we do factor money into this, that last 6 months is very expensive,
It is. And if
and
you
it's
think
a
about it,
huge
like,
draw on the healthcare system. It's a
it is.
huge
Now, someone's making
expenditure.
money. I get it. Somebody is
Right.
making money when people are dying and you're throwing a lot of, treatments and options at them.
Yes.
But how fair is that? I mean, and not just, I may choose lots of treatment, right? And I want treatments to be available. And yet, how come that's allowed? Like, why are we allowed to torture people with unnecessary medical treatment just so someone else can make a whole bunch of money if we don't want
Yeah,
that?
and the trade-off is, with oncology drugs, that comes to mind immediately, where Carol's mom had ALS, but cancer in particular, you have a runway, or in a sense a runoff. They've got 6 months, 9 months to live.
Hmm.
And
Yep.
these cycles of chemotherapy and other treatments are often debilitating to the point the side effects far outweigh the
Yes.
the extension. The overall quality of life for people suffering in this way, the last 6 months of their life, is very low.
Yes.
So there is an argument that I'm trying to coax out of here. And again, this is beyond our ken, so to speak. But it makes sense to me, even from the point of view of the medical establishment and infrastructure, to empower people with this decision.
Absolutely. And like I
Yeah.
said before, if that's what people want, if they want treatment up until the very end, I want that for them. I want all of the options available so that people can make the choice that's in line with their own values and their own wishes. And if that is, you know, break my ribs and pound on my chest and do whatever it is that you have to do to keep me alive at all costs, most people don't want that. But if that's what you want, I want that for you.
A
I don't
hundred,
want
100%. Yeah,
that. Mm-hmm.
100%. When I was a kid, the first hint I got of anything remotely related to MAID was when I heard, and again, it was apocryphal and it was kids joking around, that the Eskimos leave their old people outside of the igloo. I remember hearing this. And it filled me with such mixed emotion because on the one hand it was almost comically sad and tragic and even mean. But even when I was that little kid hearing this for the first time, whether or not this is true, we can do a chat GPT on this one. It filled me with a sense of empathy and warmth that you know what I mean, that the society had structured itself to understand, embrace, accept these last days,
Yep.
and do so for the benefit of everyone, including and especially the person suffering.
Absolutely. Yep.
And we all know, and you began this conversation by saying that we're none of us get out of here alive. And not only that, but the end of days looks grim for most of us. And just like you mentioned, you're watching Netflix with your life partner, and you look at each other, and when you're watching somebody go in a horrible kind of way, you're like, pull the plug on me, man.
Yep. Yeah. Most people do not want to live like that.
Yeah, yeah, and simply again to give people the power to do that. And
Yep.
I'm also curious, what got you involved personally, Mandi?
Yeah.
What made you motivated to join the organization and to do what you do each and every day?
Yeah. I actually started my career thinking I wanted to work with kids. I had no training in death and dying. I'm a social worker, but I thought kids don't die or aren't even affected by death. It didn't even cross my mind that they do die and that they know people that die. And it was sort of an accident. I was working in a hospital, and somebody suggested that I do a little children's bereavement program for kids who've had somebody die. And it really was thankfully very early on in my career in 1998. And it changed the course of my career and my life. And I ended up volunteering here at End of Life Choices New York probably about 15 years ago.
Wow.
Um, and I've always been supportive. I didn't even know what it was. I saw this organization, End of Life. I thought that's kind of what I've been doing in bereavement. I learned more about this option. It clearly meant something to me. And yeah, I started volunteering about 15 years ago, and I've been the executive director here now for about 2.5 years. So I
Wonderful.
feel very fortunate that I'm able to help people at the very end of their lives in such a very powerful and meaningful way.
And we're all fortunate to listening to your message and the great work you're doing. And fingers crossed that Kathy Hochul in New York
Yes.
takes a look at that legislation, puts her signature on it, and New York can be now the 11th state where this
Yep,
is legal and practiced. And hopefully the word can get out really for the benefit of all those who suffer and their loved
absolutely.
ones. And I'm a personal freedom kind of guy, that the more we empower people to make their own decisions
Yep,
and in a sense get the government, this very flawed healthcare system, out of the way, the
yep,
better we're all for it. So thank
yep.
you so much for making time. Just as a parting glance, any events that people should be aware of,
Yeah, actually,
if they're listening now, a webinar or
yeah. So
or
you mentioned Carol. Carol's actually going to be one of our speakers next Thursday, May 1st. We
Great.
are doing a 2-hour webinar. It's free. It's with Carol, who's going to share her story, and Thaddeus Pope, who is a leading expert on the ethics of medical aid and dying. So we do focus on New York, but people from all over the country will be joining us. So if you go to the End of Life Choices New York website, under events, you can register there.
Yeah, and I'll actually share that link in the description
Excellent.
so people can go right to that page
Perfect.
and register for that webinar if you
Perfect.
hear this podcast in time, and they can
Yep.
check in periodically to see other great stuff you're doing. And we're
Yep.
gonna all keep our fingers crossed for that press release
Yes.
from the governor's office where this becomes
I'm
law.
hopeful.
The
Yes.
law of the land, or at least the state of New York.
Yes. Absolutely.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mandi. And thank you for
Thank you.
listening to the No Hair, All Heart podcast. We'd love to hear back from you. Go to the website in the description. You could also leave me a personal message, and I'm sure Mandi would love to answer any and all of your questions for this great cause.
Thank you.
Thank you.